Hello and welcome to Kingdom and Context. I'm Sean. I want to thank you for joining us here tonight for the hot seat. Tonight we're having a special guest is Matthew Janzen from Ministers of the New Covenant. Welcome, brother.
Thank you, Brother Sean. I appreciate you for having me on. I'm excited about it. Hopefully we can help some people out, man.
Yeah. So tonight you are in the hot seat to present your case. Divorce and remarriage, is it permitted in Scripture? So you're going to give your understanding of that. And I just want to, before we get started, though, I want to say a big thank you to everyone that is in the live chat here. Just in case you guys aren't aware of the hot seat format, Matthew is going to spend anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes presenting his understanding of his argument, basically, for the topic at hand. Then we're going to have we have two prepared questions that we have pulled from the announcement post of this particular episode on social media, and he'll be addressing those. And then we're just going to open it up for anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes, just audience questions, and you guys get to put him in the hot seat at that point. Bring your best questions. Now, due to the nature of how the questions flow in, we will be prioritizing super chats, but we have taken non super chat questions in previous episodes, so just keep that in mind. But guys, I'm excited for this episode. It's a very awesome topic that he's going to be addressing. I think is divorce and remarriage permitted in Scripture? So we will get right to it.
All right. Okay, so welcome everybody. Marriage, divorce, and remarriage is a very, very big subject to cover. I know it's an emotional one with a lot of people. A lot of times we talk about theological topics, and those can be good, but some of those are only up here in the mind. This one today is, I guess it begins in the mind, but it works its way out in daily life, so it affects all of us. And I want to say here from the very beginning that I believe that marriage should be for life. Marriage is between a man and a woman, and it should be for life. I'm for people getting married when they're young, the children being raised up in Yahweh and in His Torah, getting married young. I'm for short engagements or betrothal periods, and then staying married till death do they part. So I'm going on almost 27 years for me and my wife. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We have 5 children. My 4 oldest are married. I have 7 grandchildren, and then 2 in the oven, so to speak. We'll have 9 grandchildren in just a few months. So we're so excited about the family that Yahweh has blessed us with. I have no intentions of ever being separated or divorced from my wife. She's a wonderful blessing, the biggest blessing Yahweh has ever given me. And she is my bone and flesh. When Yahweh brought Eve to Adam, thereafter he took her from his side there during that deep sleep there in Genesis chapter 2. And Adam saw Eve. He said, finally, at last, one that is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. That's in Genesis 2:23. If you follow that out through the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, you'll see that phraseology, bone and flesh, refers to a familial relationship. It's kinship. And so the best way that this is seen is in the children that are generally procreated from that marriage. So no matter what happens to the initial man and woman, the husband and wife, if one dies or they're separated or divorced, when they procreate a child, you can never remove both the husband and wife from the makeup, the genetic makeup of that child. They truly become bone and flesh or family or kin. So marriage should be for life. That's the intention. That's hopefully how we all begin with. Nevertheless, we live in a fallen world. From the time of Genesis chapter 3, things that were not so in the beginning are actually so now. And Yahweh, even though it is not His perfect will that certain things take place, He still does allow certain things or have certain things put in place to kind of take care of some of man's fallenness. One that comes to mind is like in Genesis 9, verse 6, with capital punishment. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So initially from the beginning, capital punishment was not so. Man was created to live in harmony, at peace. But because of the fallenness of man and the hardness of men's hearts, certain things have to be implemented in order to keep society functioning in as peaceful a way as possible. So it is with the case of divorce and remarriage. My position tonight is very, very simple. That is this: the law of Yahweh is our standard. The law of Yahweh is perfect, converting the soul. There is no other standard but the instructions, teachings, and guidance, in Hebrew known as Torah, of Almighty Yahweh. And the law of Yahweh, both in Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, and in Exodus 21, 7 through 11, allow for divorce. Specifically, I'll cover in this opening segment Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. There are 3 steps to a lawful divorce under the leadership of the Almighty. Deuteronomy 24 says in part, when a man takes a woman and marries her, and it comes to pass that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some unseemly thing or indecency in her, then he must write out a certificate of divorce, put it in her hand, and send her out of his house. So there's a 3-step process. You can't just send her out of your house. You can't just write the certificate of divorce. You have to write it out as the husband, place it into her hand, and then send her out of the man's house. Verse 2 there in Deuteronomy 24 says, and after this, she may go and become another man's wife, not another man's mistress or a lover or an adulteress, but another man's wife. So Yahweh in his law allows for divorce and for remarriage. Deuteronomy 24 verses 1 through 2. The key point here in this text is this unseemly thing. This is how the World English Bible translates it. I think the King James might say something like uncleanness, or some Bibles might say indecency. And I'm going to present that this is something less than sexual immorality. Usually in Protestant circles and in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox circles, they understand that a man is allowed to divorce, or a woman is allowed to divorce in cases of marital infidelity. And I'll get to that momentarily. But I think that Yahweh allowed for divorce to take place for cases less than that. And I intend to show that today. So it really doesn't make sense to me that Yahweh would be saying that in a case of adultery, you write a certificate of divorce, put it in her hands, send her out of your house, and then she can go and be another man's wife. So an adulterous woman then would just be able to just go on about her way and remarry. Well, that's not what the law of Yahweh says. In Leviticus 20, verse 10, and Deuteronomy 22, verse 22, the penalty for adultery, both for the married woman and the man that took the married woman, was death. Then you also have cases where there's an engagement or a betrothal period where there's this betrothed man that assumes that after he takes his wife, she has lied to him, and whereas she said that she was a virgin, she maybe had been promiscuous during the betrothal or engagement period. And in that case, the penalty is found to be death as well. That's Deuteronomy 22, verses 13 through 21. And there was even a case in the Torah where there was a law of jealousy in Numbers chapter 5. This is where a man didn't have any evidence that a woman had been running around on him, but he suspected such might be the case. And so they would go to the priest. The priest would, let's say, concoct this sort of drink or potion up that consisted partially of dirt from the floor of the tabernacle. And if she was guilty of promiscuity, her thigh would rot. And if she was not guilty, she would be okay. So these are things that take place when something as serious as marital infidelity is suspected or found out to be the case. Such is not the case in Deuteronomy chapter 24. Deuteronomy 24 is actually about protecting women. It's not so much about protecting men. And I know this might be a hard pill to swallow or topic to talk about in relation to this, but it's not so much protecting the men of Israel, because the men of Israel under the Torah were allowed, not forced or not commanded, but allowed to have more than one wife. So the divorce clause wouldn't so much apply to the men as it would to the woman. Obviously, a married woman, if she sleeps around, she's committing adultery. That's the definition of adultery in the Torah. So Yahweh gives this permission of divorce to protect the woman. There's a man that marries this woman, and for a light matter, he falls out of love with her. He doesn't care for her. There's something he finds indecent or unseemly about her. And Yahweh permits, and in some cases commands him, you carry out this 3-step process so that she can go and be married to a man who will love, cherish, nurture, take care of her, treat her like the jewel that she is. It was not okaying the harshness or the hard-heartedness of the man. It was just a protection for the woman. Now, some people might point out that the word there in Deuteronomy 24 for like uncleanness or unseemly thing, the Hebrew word erwa, is oftentimes used in contexts of nakedness in the Bible. And that is the case. But it's also used like in Genesis 42, where it talks about a famine in the land of Egypt. It calls it the nakedness of the land, how that the land wasn't flourishing and producing food like it normally would. The Hebrew word erwa is used there. It's also used in Exodus 28 in regards to a priest's nakedness between him and the Almighty. The priest was commanded when he ministered before Yahweh there in the tabernacle as part of his garments, his holy garments, to wear linen breeches or linen trousers from the loins to the thigh to cover his nakedness. But it wasn't in the sense of covering nakedness in the sight of other human beings. It was in the sense of covering his nakedness in some special way before the Almighty as he ministered there in the temple. And then I think the biggest one here is found in one chapter before Deuteronomy 24 and Deuteronomy 23, where in Deuteronomy 23, verses 9, 12, 13, and 14, we find that when Israel went to war against their enemy, and it so happened that one of the men of Israel had to use the bathroom during the night, he was to take his shovel or his digging tool and go away there from the camp and dig a hole and as we would say here, Granddaddy would say in the South, go number 2 there in the hole and then cover it up with dirt. And the text says there, I think it's in verse 14, for Yahweh your Elohim, he walks in the midst of your camp, and he doesn't want to see anything indecent or unseemly. And that's the Hebrew word erwa. Actually, the phrase there in Deuteronomy 23:14 is erwat dabar, which is the identical phrase in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1, where the husband finds this unseemly thing, this erwat dabar, in the wife that he has taken, something he deems to be indecent or unseemly. And so these texts show that erwa can be something much less than sexual immorality. And this is how both Jewish historians, Josephus in his Antiquities 4 and Philo in his Special Laws 3, they both understand the law of Deuteronomy 24 to be allowing divorce for light matters. Again, not as an okay to the husband, but as a protection for the wife so that she can receive this certificate in her hand as proof that she doesn't belong to her previous husband, and she can go and become another man's wife. That's my position in a nutshell. Now, I suspect that the majority of the questions that I received tonight stem from Matthew 5, Matthew 19, and 1 Corinthians 7. And I want to encourage everybody that when you ask questions in regards to those texts, first remember that Yeshua of Nazareth is an apostle of Yahweh, Hebrews 3:1. He's the apostle and high priest of our confession. So Yahweh is the one that sent Yeshua, not the other way around. And Yeshua is not going to be out of line with the law or the Torah of Yahweh, Matthew 5:17 through 20. I think most people watching tonight will know that text pretty well. Also, 1 Corinthians 7 was written by the Apostle Paul, and the Apostle Paul is an apostle of Yeshua. And so we need to be Bereans, Acts 17:10 through 11. We need to make sure that when we listen to Yeshua or read Yeshua, or listen or read the Apostle Paul, that we examine the scriptures, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, to make sure that what we are reading from or listening to from Yeshua or Shaul is in line with the instruction manual of Almighty Yahweh. We do not want to abolish the Torah. We do not want to speak contrary to the Torah or the Nevi'im, the law, or the prophets. We want to speak in line with them. And I think that we can harmonize beautifully the words of Yeshua, our beloved Messiah, and Yeshua's apostle, Paul, in their later epistles, later revelation. So I'll stop right there, Brother Sean, and we can move on with the program.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate you sharing your ideas, your scriptural exegesis on this topic. And for everyone that's in the live chat, we're going to have the upcoming Q&A and here just soon. So I want to make sure you get your questions in. But I tell you what, before we do that, we're going to a short channel sponsorship break. Hi, I'm Sean Griffin. I want to encourage you to check out sanctifysupplycompany.com. They help us make wonderful shirts for our channel, as well as shirts like this, Make America Pray Again. And I think you'll really enjoy their products. Good quality, great price, wonderful people on a mission to serve the gospel of the kingdom. This shirt inspired me to create a little sin. The ballad of life is a sweet song to me, stretching my heart so I can receive this grace that will take me from frailty to strength. It was your intention to recreate me. Father, lead us to pray once again, strengthen our knees, lift up our hands. Father, lead us to call on your name, and turn from our sins, to walk in your way. Father, lead us to pray once again. Father, lead us to pray once again. All right, guys, thank you. We are back, and we're going to jump into our second segment tonight. So let us do this. We have a couple questions that came in on social media. All right. So let's see here. Is that, oh, that's not it. Hang on 1 second. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So this one came in for you, Matthew, on this topic. And I'll let you address this one.
Yeah, so the question, what would you say to those who say Jesus supersedes the Mosaic law, that say a person can divorce when Jesus said, I say what God joined, let no man separate? Okay, good question. This would stem, I think, from Matthew 19, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Mark chapter 10 as well. So if we read those texts carefully, Yeshua doesn't say that no man can separate what God has joined, or no man cannot separate, I should say, what God has joined. The understanding is let no man, or man should not separate what God has joined together. And so marriage, again, should be for life. Divorce is not the perfect will of God. Even most Christians would agree that through adultery or marital infidelity, sexual immorality, that a marriage can be dissolved and parties separate. So it's possible to separate what God has joined together, but it's not his perfect will. So that would kind of cover the last part there of that question. And the first part about Yeshua or Jesus being different or contradictory than the law of Moses, this is pretty huge right here. I won't go into too much detail. I imagine we're going to probably cover this off and on as we move throughout the night. But it's vitally important that we understand that when Yeshua states what he does in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, and also in Matthew 19 when some of the Pharisees come to him and ask him about divorce, that we recognize that there in the Greek text of the Gospel of Matthew, and also in the original Hebrew text of Deuteronomy and throughout the Hebrew Bible, that there's a distinction in Hebrew and Greek between a divorce and a sending away or a putting away of a wife. What Yeshua is condemning there in the Gospel of Matthew is men who are putting their wife away, sending their wife away without giving those first 2 steps to their wife, writing out the certificate of divorce, putting it in her hand. So they're skipping to the 3rd step. They're sending their wife away, which means she's not lawfully divorced, and therefore she's still lawfully attached or legally attached to her husband. And that's the case in Deuteronomy 24. Remember, in Deuteronomy 24, 3 steps. I think the Hebrew word for divorce is kerith. The Hebrew word for put away or send away is shalach. If you look up kerith in the Hebrew Bible, it's always used as a technical term in regards to divorce. But shalach, send away or put away, it's a very loose term that's used hundreds of times in contexts that have nothing to do with divorce. As a matter of fact, we talk about a lot, or Brother Sean talks about a lot on this channel, the principle of agency, which in Hebrew sometimes is called a shaliach. And you can kind of hear the correlation. Shalach in Hebrew just means to send someone away. The same thing is in the Greek. I think the Greek word for send away is apoluo versus divorce is apostation. Apostation, you can kind of hear the word apostasy right there. And so Yeshua is condemning men who apoluo or send away their wives without a certificate of divorce, making him in perfect harmony with the law of Yahweh that says a lawful divorce must have these 3 things for it to take hold and be considered lawful in the community of Israel.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, Matthew. And we had another one that came in on socials this past week, and this is the next question here for you. So the questioner is asking, after being in an abusive 15-year first marriage, I'm now in a second marriage, doing the best I can to lead my small children to walk in Torah. My husband is not Torah observant and has no interest. Is this marriage valid now?
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times that I've had people, both men and women, come to me with a similar question like this, being a pastor, and my heart goes out to this person, to this sister, as she refers to her husband not being Torah observant here. And the short answer is, I do believe that your marriage is valid now. I do. No woman is required to stay in a marriage with a man that is abusive to her. I think it's Exodus 21, 7 through 11. And there's technicalities here, but in a nutshell, there are things that a husband has to provide his wife. Marriage is a covenant or a contract in the Hebrew Bible. And Exodus 21:10 says that he is to provide food, clothing, and marital rights or conjugal rights. This lets us know that Yahweh expects a husband to take care of, nurture, and protect his wife and provide for his wife. So, like the husband would bring the food home and the wife would prepare the food for the table, right? This is how it was done in Hebrew culture. So, how much more would it be if he has to provide food, clothing, and marital rights? How much greater of a transgression it would be if he begins to not only cease to do those things, but to begin to abuse the wife that he's supposed to nurture and to cherish. So I think Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 2 would release you from that type of a marriage, provided that, he gave you a bill of divorcement there. So with your second marriage here, in regards to walking in Torah with your children, I want to encourage you to continue to do that. And the words of the Apostle Peter come to mind. You may flip over to 1 Peter chapter 3 in your quiet time, sister, and take a look at where Peter admonishes the sisters there to be submissive even to their unbelieving husbands. This is not saying, submit to a husband that is going to, be abusive to you or to your children, but simply when a woman is found where she's, maybe she married somebody in an unbelieving state and then she, came to the light and changed her heart and began to follow the Almighty and wants to teach her children. Peter says that without a spoken word, you are to be an example by your behavior or your conduct to your unbelieving wife. And that will do more in regards to winning him over to Yahweh and Yeshua, to the faith. And so that's what I would encourage you to do. Just live that quiet, peaceable life. Don't try to force anything on your husband. If he asks you a question, you can answer that. But just be a light to him. That's your mission field there in your home. So I hope that helps you out there, sister.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate you addressing that. All right, guys. So now we're going to go into the final segment of the hot seat where we're going to take your questions from the audience. And as always, as the question starts piling in, super chats will take priority for their generosity. And so we already have some questions coming in for you, Matthew. It looks like from what you stated in your presentation, Seeing Lenny is asking, how does Ezra 9 and 10 line up with this view?
Yeah. So in Matthew chapter 5, there's what's called an exception clause. Whoever puts away his wife is how it should render. And I think the KJV gets the first part of that right. It translates apoluo as put away, saving for the cause of fornication. And the word in Greek there, fornication, is porneia. It can cover a wide range of illicit sexual activity, unlawful sexual activity. Um, uh, whoever puts away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her that is put away commits adultery. The King James will say, whoever marries her that is divorced. That's inaccurate. The World English Bible, Literal Standard Version, Young's Literal Translation will get that right. Whoever marries her that is put away commits adultery, because she's, still legally bound to the previous husband. Excuse me. In Ezra 9 and 10, there were some forbidden marriages that took place, probably in regards to the priesthood there. If you remember back in Leviticus 21, the priest had to marry a woman from his own tribe. The priest couldn't marry a divorced woman. I think he even had to marry, if a woman was widowed, she had to be widowed by being married to a previous Levite man to begin with. So certain marriages are disallowed in the Torah. And in those cases, that would be considered porneia. And so all that would be needed in Ezra 9 and 10, or in any of those illicit unions that Leviticus 18 condemns, if somebody finds themselves in that type of a union there of porneia, when they find that out, there's no need to give a certificate of divorce, because God has not joined together that union to start with. So all that is needed in those cases is to separate, and that's what they did in Ezra 9 and 10. There's no indication there that there was any certificate of divorce given to those women. They just put those women away. That would be my understanding of that text there.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question coming in, marked for the king, and is asking, why is the woman always the protected one? What if the unhappy woman puts the certificate in the man's hand?
Yeah, so this would be more of a modern day thing, and we have to be careful. I understand what the brother is saying, and obviously in our modern day culture, things like that can happen. In the Hebrew culture, in which Deuteronomy 24 was written, the society was patriarchal. So I don't say patriarchal in the sense that I'm trying to, have a big giant thumb to pin my wife down and try to direct her every thought or every move. But I do believe Yahweh teaches that the husband is the leader of the wife. We see this in the Torah in Numbers 30, where a wife of a man or a man's daughter can make a vow, but on the day that the husband or the father hears the vow, that man can actually overturn his wife or his daughter's vow on the day that he hears of it. So the husband there is the leader, is the patriarch. So in Deuteronomy 24, in a patriarchal society, it was the man that was in charge, in lead, and it was the woman that was the vulnerable one there in the marriage. So as I said before, and I know this is not popular, and there's go back and forth in the Torah community on this, but I think that we see in the Torah there's evidence that men could have more than one wife, such as the case with Abraham or with Jacob Israel, or in the law of Exodus 21, or in the law of Deuteronomy 21, but not so with the woman. And so Yahweh there is protecting the woman because she would be the most vulnerable in society. So this man that finds, this wife to have an unseemly or an indecent thing about her, he may already have another wife. And Yahweh is saying, look, if this particular woman you find to be indecent and you're not going to love her, do these three things. Give her that bill of divorcement, send her out of your house so that she can be loved by another man. Now, in our case, in modern culture, yeah, there may be cases where it's vice versa. And the man is in love with this woman, but the woman who was once in love with a man, she hates his guts now. These kind of things do happen in our society. And I think in those cases that the principle of Deuteronomy 24 would still, stand true, where the divorce could be had, even though the man doesn't want it, but the woman does. And the man is free to go about his life and find him a woman that will love him.
Okay. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. And it looks like good and faithful servants asking, you point out the specific steps of Deuteronomy 24. Can you expound on any significant difference between the Karatut, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Karatut certificate process and the Shalak, the putting away? And he's got a nice in-depth question for you. And Malachi 2:14 through 16. And Matthew, if
Yeah.
you need me to put any scripture on screen, I can do that for us.
Yeah. So the main thing to remember in Deuteronomy 24 is verse 1, where the 3 steps are given. The man must write out a certificate of divorce, put it in her hand, and then send her out of his house. The certificate of divorce there, the first step is the Karathuth. The sending her out of his house is the third step, the last step after he places the certificate in her hand. Now, just think about this. A man could, I'm not saying this was right for him to do, but a man had the power to skip straight to the third step and just say, I don't love you. I'm not worried about you. I don't care what happens to you. I'm sending you away. And that would be a hard-hearted man. And remember, Yeshua says later in Matthew 19 that this was due to the hardness of men's hearts, the hardness of the male heart. I'm not saying a woman's heart can never be hard, but specifically the hardness of the male heart is what caused Yahweh through prophet Moses to give this precept, this allowance, or Yeshua even calls it a commandment in one instance there, and I think it's in the Gospel of Mark. So there's a difference between Karathuth, the certificate, the actual bill of divorcement, and then just the sending away. I would just encourage you, we have these resources at our fingertips there now on our computers and our phones. Just, do a word study of that word Karathuth. It's used just minimally throughout the Hebrew Bible compared to the word shalak, which is used so many times. And just see how shalak can be used, for any sense of, I could send somebody to the post office, or I could, send an animal out of the gate or something like that. But Karathuth is more technical. When we get to Malachi chapter 2:14 through 16, some Bibles will say that the God of Israel hates divorce. And you know what? I've experienced and seen people that have went through tragic divorces. And I think a lot of times Yahweh does hate what takes place. It doesn't mean that he does not allow it, because his law states such in Deuteronomy 24. But the Hebrew word there in Malachi 2 is not Karathuth. It's actually shalak. And when you look at the context of Malachi 2, what some of these hard-hearted Israelite men were doing, where they had been married to the wives of their youth, and they were putting those wives away without a certificate of divorce in order to marry the daughter of a foreign god. And that is what Yahweh specifically was hating there. There is a variant there that it may not even be saying that the God of Israel hates putting away. It could be saying that the man hates his wife and puts her away. That could go either way there from the Hebrew into the English. But I would encourage you to go and read that text in Malachi 2 and start, above and below, and take it really slow. And you'll find that the prophet Malachi actually did his ministry during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah there, where some of those daughters of foreign gods were taken as strange wives and then condemned, as the previous questioner mentioned. So hopefully that helps there on Malachi chapter 2. I think you muted there, brother.
So thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for answering that question.
Yeah.
So let's see if I can see another one coming in here. Let me see here. I think this one skirts on the edge of this topic. So you let me know. Do you want to address this one?
Yeah, we can talk about this. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The requirements for a biblical marriage to be valid. So in Hebrew culture, Torah abiding culture, the okay laid predominantly in the hands of the parents of the young lady or the woman. specifically the father. We can see this. I'm going off the top of my head here, but we can see this. I believe it's in Exodus 22, where it talks about how this man seduces or entices a maid, a virgin who is not betrothed. She's not promised in marriage. And it says, he shall surely endow her or surely pay the bridal price for her to be his wife. This is if he's enticed her and there is sexual relations prior to there being an agreed marriage or ceremony. But then I think the next verse says, if her father utterly refuse, he still has to pay the virgin's dowry. And Deuteronomy 22, which is the parallel, says that would be 50 shekels of silver. If the father doesn't refuse, then, he takes her as his wife. So marriage, though, was a family thing. You didn't necessarily have to have a pastor. You didn't necessarily have to have this big ceremony. The John 2 wedding feast there where Yeshua turned the water into wine, that may have been probably was what we would call like the reception after the ceremony. That the families had already agreed, okay, we're going to, these two young people are going to get married. Remember in Genesis 24 where Abraham, the first thing he does, he makes his servant, which probably there is Eleazar. Eleazar has to place his hand under Abraham's thigh and swear to Yahweh, don't take a wife from the Canaanites. Go to my own people. We want to get a good wife for my son, Isaac. And then Eleazar goes, or the servant goes, and Yahweh blesses him. Rebecca comes out. She waters all 10 of his camels, gives him water. And he recounts. It's a long chapter. It's a beautiful chapter. And he basically obtains permission from Rebecca's family. Now, they didn't force Rebecca because Rebecca was then asked, if you read that chapter carefully, do you want to go? And she says, yeah, I'll go. So there must have been some knowledge there between the two families. And then they took her back, and then she lighted off the camel. It says she took a veil and covered herself. She went into the tent and she became Isaac's wife. And so this would be the biblical marriage here. I do want to caution, though, I want to caution people in the Torah community because I've seen this happen. A lot of times I found that, how do I say this? I guess I'll just be plain, Brother Sean, and you can stop me if I'm being too plain. But sometimes I've seen men prowl on good-hearted women. Women are vulnerable. They're in a rough spot. They've had a rough life. And I have seen men prowl for wrong reasons on women. I have. And you know what? I've seen the other happen as well. And so you want to make sure that marriage is it's a family thing. It is and when I say family, if you're an older person and there's not like a mother and father in view, you can have like believers vouch for either side, where you're not just taking a man's word or taking a woman's word that, they're going to give you their heart. As my wife likes to say, a lot of these boys like to whisper sweet nothings in the little girl's ear and make her promises, and they never intend to keep. So you want to be careful with that. You want to make sure that a person's vows are willing to be made and commitments are willing to be made in a public fashion. It's a family affair, so to speak. Okay. So private commitments lead to sloppy commitments. But when somebody is willing to commit to you and contract to you, which marriage in the Bible is a covenant, it's a contract. There's stipulations, there's regulations, there's things to be followed. When somebody is willing in the sight of an assembly or a group of believers that are trusted and know both parties, and they're willing to commit publicly, that makes for solid commitments. So always keep that in mind when you're wanting to get married to somebody.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Well said. And we have another question here. Heart for His Glory is asking, are you aware of the Greek word for committing adultery in Matthew 5:32 is in passive voice, meaning that the divorced remarried actually received the adultery as if stigmatized? Now, if we need to take a minute to look up a specific Greek word or whatnot, we got plenty of
Yeah.
time.
Let me read it slowly. I'm not sure I understand. Are you aware of the Greek word for committing adultery in Matthew 5:32 is in the passive voice, meaning that the divorced and remarried actually receive the adultery as if stigmatized? I'm not sure, brother or sister. I don't know if I'm exactly understanding the question. I will say this. I do think part of what Yeshua is saying is that when this hard-hearted man puts away his wife Apaluo without a certificate of divorce, and she goes and gets married to somebody else, I think Yeshua is saying the man who put her in that situation is guilty of the adultery that he is causing because he is not following Yahweh's law back in Deuteronomy 24 with this woman. I do think that's the case. I'm not sure if that's what they're getting at here, but maybe they could clarify in another question.
Okay. Yeah, guys. Like I have pinned to the top of the chat, be sure that your questions are as clear as possible. Make sure try to proofread them before you submit them, especially if you're doing a super chat question, and also super chats will take priority as we go through the questions here. So it looks like all right. So we have a question here from Well Done 25. Do you think the latter part of Proverbs 18:22 in the Septuagint requires a divorce in the case of adultery to avoid being ungodly?
Can we pull that up, Brother Sean?
Yeah, we sure can. Give me just 1 second here. Proverbs 18:22.
We got some Bible students watching. Let's see.
All right. So this is going to be, I'll put this on the screen.
Proverbs 6:21.
So it says in the Septuagint, it says, "He that has found a good wife has found favors and has received gladness from God. He that puts away a good wife puts away a good thing, and he that keeps an adulteress is foolish and ungodly."
Okay, 18:22. My translation says, "He who rejects a good wife rejects the good, but he who keeps an adulteress is foolish and impious." Okay, so is this the Brenton there that you're reading? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So he that has found a good wife has found favors and has received gladness from God. That's self-explanatory. I think that's beautiful. He that puts away a good wife puts away a good thing. That could be talking about putting away a wife without a certificate of divorce. Sometimes in the Bible, the word shalak is used as shorthand for the entire divorce process because it's the last step in the divorce, such as the case where back into Exodus 22:16-17, when a man entices a maid who is not betrothed, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. The Deuteronomy 22 parallel says he may never put her away all of his days. I don't think that's talking about he may never put her away by itself without a certificate of divorce. That would go for any wife. I think it's referring to he may never divorce her. It's put away is the last step in the divorce process. So that could be talking about that. And if you get rid of a good wife, you get rid of a good thing. And then he that keeps an adulteress is foolish and ungodly. What I think that last part is saying, which is a third thing all by itself, is that a man who has married a wife and she commits adultery on him, she sleeps around on him, she's unrepentant, she has no desire, to make amends or anything like that, but yet he wants to hold on to her. I think the author there of that proverb is saying that is foolish. That's not to say that there can't be repentance. There can be, and you can, work things out. I've known couples that have, but there's a difference between somebody that commits a sin, does a wrong, recognizes that wrong, wants to make it right and not do it again, versus somebody that says, you know what, I'm done with the marriage. I don't really care. I don't have any remorse for what I did. You don't want to hold on to a woman or a man like that.
All right. Thank you for addressing that, Matthew. So we have another one. This is obviously with this topic, there are going to be some situational questions, right?
Sure.
So if you don't feel comfortable answering one of these situational questions, let me know, because I
Okay.
know we're not with this particular topic. You may not want to step into the case of a marriage counselor,
Sure.
but at the same time, I just want to, even though you're in the hot seat, I want to give you the out
Yeah.
on some of these based
Thank
on
you,
this
brother.
context. So Yoliem is asking, if neither partner was under the covenant when they married and adultery was committed and the wife left, can she file for divorce, especially if the husband will not do so?
If neither partner was under the covenant, so I'm guessing she's saying that they were non-believers, non-followers, what we would call heathens or Gentiles when they married, and adultery was committed and the wife left. Can she file for divorce, especially if the husband will not do so? I think if we take our case back to Old Covenant Israel, I think that there could have been cases where even though the man was the one that gave the certificate of divorce, um, if the woman was not receiving that from the man, her next step maybe was to go to the elders or to the judges of Israel and say, look, I've been put away and I've been like this for X amount of years. Is there anything that we can do to make this man give me a certificate of divorce? As a matter of fact, if you do some research, just very little research, and you could probably even go on YouTube and watch a few videos where this is actually, unfortunately, a practice that some do in modern day Judaism. There's one woman that I watched that she has been what's called an Aguna. An Aguna means a chained wife to a dead marriage for about 10 years, last time I checked. And she was put away by her husband after she had a child. He fell out of love with her. He did not give her a certificate of divorce. And she's basically just been living there in limbo for 10 years. And now you say, well, can't she get a divorce with the state or the jurisdiction that she's under there governmentally? And yes, she can, but that kind of divorce is not recognized rabbinically. So she can't marry back into her Orthodox faith. Now, whether or not you agree with Orthodox Judaism is beside the point. The point here is that this man has violated Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. He has not went through this 3-step process. He's put her away, and therefore she's in a life of poverty. And a long time ago, women placed in that position would either fall into poverty or sometimes go into prostitution because they had no other way to make a living or to get through life. And so it places the woman in a terrible, terrible position. So I would say modern day times, yes, that's what I would say. I would say in those cases that you could file for a divorce, and recognize too, brothers and sisters, that all of us that came to Yahweh and Yeshua as an adult, if we were not raised in the Torah and we lived a heathen lifestyle and then eventually gave our life over to the Creator and His Son, we all have sins in our past that we can ask for forgiveness of and repent of, but we can't change. There's things that we've done we can't go back and undo, see. But the good thing about it is that when we repent, based upon Yahweh's favor, His grace and His mercy, and on the work of Yeshua, we're forgiven. And so we need to make sure to rest in that. That doesn't mean we continue in sin, right? That grace abound, Romans 6:1. But it does mean that past sin can be forgiven when we admit it, ask for forgiveness, and repent of that past sin. So hopefully that helps this question.
All right. Thank you. So we have another question coming in from Joseph A. Snade, and he's asking, what proof do we have that a man had to pay back the dowry or some other expensive amount if he gave his wife a writ of divorce and sent her out of his house?
I'm not sure that I'm not sure. I haven't mentioned anything about paying back the dowry. So I can't really speak to that question. I would say that there is no requirement there in Deuteronomy 24. I think that the dowry was already initially paid by the young man to the family, specifically the dad of the young woman. So I'm not sure what he's asking about paying back the dowry or expensive amount there. So I'd
Okay.
have to ponder on that a little bit more. Yeah.
And just real quick, Miss Marsha, thank you for the gifted memberships, the Kingdom of Context gifted members. Thank you so much for those. Appreciate your generosity. And it looks like we have another one coming in here. All right. So Bible Prospector is asking, can you define adultery according to the Torah?
Leviticus 20 verse 10 and Deuteronomy 22, verse 22, adultery, although it branches out after this minorly, but adultery is taking another man's wife. So, like the 10th commandment would be, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, right? That would be like coveting. And then the 7th commandment, do not commit adultery, would be actually physically laying with your neighbor's wife. Now, Yeshua, as I mentioned, he expands that out. You're not supposed to even look upon her with lust in your eyes. That doesn't mean you can't have a conversation. If you're at the church service and you're talking to your neighbor's wife and you're looking at her when you're talking to her, no, Yeshua is saying you don't gaze upon her to lust. So that would be the biblical definition of adultery, technically, right there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for the answer, brother. So I think we had a follow up to a question you just answered for Yolim. This is law abiding Christian asking, going off of Yolim's question, can the woman go before the Israelite leaders to get approval for a divorce? Thank you. I think her question, do you remember her
Yeah.
question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there's nothing in the Torah that says that. So I'm assuming that could be the case. There is something like in Mark chapter 10 with the words of Yeshua where it looks like he flips it around, where a woman can put away her husband instead of the husband put away his wife. And how I think that probably would have taken place under that patriarchal society is, I'm going to go talk to the elders or to the judges of Israel, what Yeshua would have called the council or the Sanhedrin, and tell them about my case. I'm not sure how all that would have been ironed out. But the main thing is that it was definitely wrong for a man to simply put or send away his wife without a certificate of divorce if she found no favor in his eyes. So you think, well, he puts the woman in a terrible situation and he's off scot free. And the answer is no, he's not, because Yeshua in the Sermon on the Mount says that he holds that type of a man accountable for the situation that he's put his wife in. And so the man is guilty of causing adultery in that case. So it'd be much better off if he just followed the Torah and gave her a bill of divorce so she could go be remarried and live a happy life with a man who actually would love her as Yahweh commands.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. And Bible Prospector is also asking, is Exodus 21, 1 through 6 considered marriage? And Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4 does not apply yet. The man and woman live together as man and wife.
So Exodus 21, 1 through 6 is the Hebrew ebed, it's the Hebrew servant. And there's a there's a case where this servant, even though he is supposed to be let free on the 7th year, as you see it here on the screen, that there's some cases where uh, he may have arrived with a wife, and then there's other cases where he arrived alone, but his master gave him a wife, and then he bore children with her. And so then when it was time to go free on the 7th year, if that wife and children were initially given by the master, like the master gave him a wife, he had the option of staying there and becoming a servant or an ebed for life. And he said, I love my master, my wife, and my children. So this isn't slavery like in the sense of, just being beat with a whip and forced to work till your fingers are bloody. This is a servant to master relationship where a master has provided a particular way of life and income for this Hebrew Ebed. He's given him a wife, and then he started a family. And the 7th year of release comes and he says, no, no. He said, I got such a great master, and I've got a wife now, and I've got children. The text says his master must bring him to the judges and then bring him to the door of the doorpost. His master must pierce his ear with an awl, and he will serve his master for life. So this is definitely a biblical form of slavery. The Torah does sanction, but it's not like the harsh slavery that people may say that Exodus 21 sanctions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. And there's another question here that I wanted to bring up from one of your earlier answers,
Sure.
but I'm going to have to kind of reword it a little bit. You probably can make sense of it, I suppose, as well. But so the question is saying an abuser volunteers his fault and puts the bill of divorce in her hand. So I guess it's coming from the sense of if a woman's being abused,
Yeah.
will the man volunteer to do this proper course of action?
Yeah. I mean, obviously not in every case. I mean, this is the problem. We have some men that are just wicked, and they get with this woman for lustful reasons, maybe, or alternative reasons. It may be money involved or something like that. And then all of a sudden, the woman, bless her heart, she finds out the difficult way because she was made all these promises, and then he's an abuser. And yeah, so this is a terrible situation, and I see the point that's being made. He is supposed to, by the law of Yahweh, um, to give her a bill of divorcement, but that doesn't always happen then, and it doesn't always happen in our modern day and time. People say, well, I know you sent me the papers, but I'm not going to sign them, or vice versa. Um, so you just deal with it. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath. And I know sometimes when we're being abused and we're being mistreated, we want to, the human tendency is to bite back. But sometimes if we take a deep breath and we pray and we just kind of calm down and we act in a way that our flesh doesn't want to act, we can get results where we can't get them if we act in the same way. And so that's what I would suggest. I would suggest to try to be peaceable in order to get the righteous results that you want to get, even if it's from an unrighteous person. You'd be surprised what even unrighteous heathen people will do, um, if you know, if you treat them with kindness in order to get what you need to get out of that situation. But in some cases, I want especially the women here, because I think they're more vulnerable than the men. Um, I want the women to recognize that you're not required to stay. I know I've known some denominations and pastors to tell women to stay in all cases, whether they're being abused, when the children's being abused, and that's just not a requirement of Yahweh. It's always proper to save life, not to put life in danger. We can even break Shabbat to save somebody's life. So life is way up here. And so you definitely need to get out of that situation when your life is in danger.
All right. Thank you, brother. Yeah, it's funny. Actually, you mentioned that Agona situation. I read about that a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Apparently, that's still a serious problem in Israel today
Yeah. Sad, isn't it?
amongst the men. Yeah, in Rabbinic Judaism.
Very sad.
It is sad. Okay. So we have, guys, get your questions in before we go. Like I said, super chats will take priority. We just got a few more minutes here, probably about 10 to 15 minutes before the Q&A session is over. And let me see if I'm missing. Oh, Shane Walden is asking about thoughts on a marriage relationship to God's authority structure.
Okay. So I do believe that the husband is the head of the wife. I don't think that means that we just, boss her around and give her orders and, bark. Um, I think that Yeshua gave us the best example of leadership. Leadership is to be a servant. He came not to be served, but to serve, give his life as a ransom for many, Matthew 20:28. And I think that's how we are to lead our wife, men. I think that when our wives see that we love them, cherish them, care for them, would do everything in our power to protect them, would give our life for them like Christ gave his life for the church, then they willingly and naturally want to submit to a man like that. And I think the buck starts with the man. I think since the man is the head, I've had so many men come to me over the years and say, well, Brother Matthew, I could love my wife if she would just submit. And I'm like, dude, you're the leader, you're the head. You want to claim that headship, which means it starts with you. So if the man is supposed to set the spiritual temperature in his home, as goes the man, generally goes the family. So a man is supposed to live in such a way that he causes his wife to become more and more sanctified for the Almighty. She draws closer to the Almighty because she has such a good spiritual headship example in her husband. But the husband definitely is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church. I don't want to try to um, gray those words or those concepts over, because I think when we talk about Christ being the head of the church, everybody has no problem with it. We know that the church is submissive to Christ, and I think it's the same thing. The wife is to be submissive to her husband. Obviously, Yahweh comes first. I mean, if a husband wants his wife to rob a bank, she's not required to rob a bank, and disobey Yahweh to obey her husband. But within the confines of Yahweh's law, she is to submit to him. But I'm telling you, you husbands, the way that you cause this to happen is not by barking orders, but by leading by example, being a humble servant leader that your wife wants to get in line, wants to follow, and wants to submit to. I believe it'll do wonders for your marriage.
So Matthew, whenever I'm making a sandwich, I make sure Lindsay comes to watch, and I'm saying, see how I make myself a sandwich? That's how you can do it, sweetie. You can make me a sandwich just like this. No, I'm just playing. So she's a wonderful cook. She makes me much better meals than just sandwiches. All right. So we have a question coming in from a good and faithful servant, and he says, it's more of a tangential question. How does all this affect what God did to Israel, Judah, and Jeremiah 3 and Isaiah 50?
Yeah.
Did Israel and Judah ever marry another husband, or was it possible for him to take her back? Thanks for your time.
Yeah, so I actually don't think that she did marry, quote unquote, marry another husband. But here's the thing: when Yahweh is dealing with Israel and Judah in these texts, these prophetic texts, these are all metaphorical. Okay, so Yahweh is not literally married to Israel. He's in a covenant relationship. That what they are literally is he is their God, their mighty one, and they are his people. They are to serve him. And so metaphorically, he can describe that in a marital relationship, like he's a husband and they're a wife, not literally, but metaphorically. We know this because earlier, like in Exodus 4, he says, Israel is my firstborn son. I brought my son out of Egypt. Now, did he literally marry his own son? That doesn't make any sense. But Yahweh uses these metaphors in scripture to describe the covenantal relationship that he has with his people. So I recognize that there's some language about divorce and putting away, and you went whoring after other gods instead of remaining faithful to me. Ezekiel 16 comes to mind. Yahweh blessed Israel with all these beautiful garments and jewels, and she took them and whored after other gods. But all this is metaphorical language to get you to understand that whereas Israel was supposed to serve Yahweh, their Elohim, their mighty one, they decided, no, we're going to serve the mighty ones of the other nations. We're going to break covenant with Yahweh. So I wouldn't veer off to those texts first and foremost when I talk about this subject. I think the main text to go to on this subject will be ones where Yahweh is giving commandments about human to human relations in Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, in Exodus 21, 7 through 11, and then the later revelatory text in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, and even in Apostle Paul's 1 Corinthians 7.
Okay. Thank you for the answer, brother. I saw one right back up here I wanted to grab real quick. Someone in live chat said they know it all, so I don't have any questions for you. Just I think they're being a little tongue in cheek. All right. Wait a minute. Where'd it go here? Sorry, my little scroll in my studio is kind of like resetting. There's the question. All right, guys, we're going to be ending the Q&A soon, so be sure to get your questions in for Matthew. And let me see here. Oh, he said his wife says that he knows it all. So that's why he doesn't have any questions for you. And I think you just answered that one with the super chats. It's pretty much the same question. Okay, so we have Kenobi and Ember is asking, can a woman remarry her husband, her ex-husband, after a remarriage? They are now believers and have children together.
Yeah. So there in Deuteronomy 24, if you continue to read there in verse 3 and 4, it says that when the woman goes and becomes another man's wife, if that second husband hates her, and notice again, it's the man that is hating her. Brother Sean can pull it up. So it's not that the woman is doing anything, guilty of death or anything like that. It's just that this husband, he's a hard-hearted man, so he hates her, and he writes her certificate of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away. 3-step process. Or if that second husband dies, it then says that she may not go back, verse 4, to that former husband right there, because she is defiled. And I haven't been able to figure out exactly what the reason for this is, and ultimately it doesn't matter. We just know Yahweh gives us a law. He has a reason, whether we understand the reason or not. But I think that it would be unlawful for a person, excuse me, to go back to the first husband after they have been remarried to a second husband. Now, it opens up a big can of worms, because we wonder about, okay, well, all this happened when I was a heathen, so what do I do now? And I think that there's a difference between knowing this law and breaking this law as a covenant person versus being a heathen Gentile, for 30 or 40 or 50 years before you come to the knowledge of Yahweh, and having all these things happen, like I said before in a previous answer, that you can't undo any of. So I think that there is a difference there. But if you are serving Yahweh and you know this law, then you need to abide by it. So I don't believe it would be lawful for you to go back to the former husband if you have been remarried already.
All right. Thank you, brother. Jay Zadik is asking, do you think, given our modern society, it's a good idea to be legally married so as to discourage divorce for frivolous reason, as seen in the Torah, married in the eyes of Yah crowd?
So I can see pros and cons. I think sometimes men um, are scared to get legally married, and they just want to be married in Yahweh's eyes because they're worried about some of the things that they've had women do to them in the past. But on the other hand, I think some women want to be legally married because they want there to be accountability with the man. And so I would say, I would encourage you to not just be married in the eyes of Yahweh, but I would encourage you to have their a marriage license. And boy, that's going to upset some people, I know. And it's not because I'm this big pro government guy, but it's just that I think that it holds people accountable. It holds people accountable, and I'm just afraid that I have seen as a pastor. Um, Both men and women who didn't want to have anything to do with the state in their marriage, simply because in the back of their mind, we later found out they really weren't in this for keeps. And that is completely wrong and sinful. You should never get involved with a woman, men, or with a man, woman, if you're not willing to devote your whole life to that person. Marriage should be for life when you get married. You shouldn't have it in the back of your mind, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll just get divorced. Now that's the Hollywood way, right? That's the worldly way. You should take it serious and covenant with a person, and in your heart and mind realize, all right, this is going to be my person for life, my spouse, my husband, or my wife. So hopefully that'll help Jay there.
All right. Thank you for your answer. Early adopter is asking, where in the scriptures does it say that marriage is a covenant?
Oh man, all through. So, Exodus 21, 7 through 11 would be a really good text to go to here, where there's covenant stipulations. Now, I recognize this is referring to a maidservant, or an amah in Hebrew. So, like if you start in verse 7, it says something like this. Um, when a man sells his daughter as an amah, or a maidservant, she is not to leave as the ebed do, the men servants do. So this seems odd to us, and a lot of the atheists or agnostics, they'll say that the law or the Bible allowed a father to sell his daughter into slavery. And when that's said out of context, that sounds so terrible. And people say, well, phooey on the Bible, but they've actually never read and studied the Bible. But a way that you can kind of comprehend this in our modern day times is how that you may have a young lady that gets pregnant, or a young man, a young lady that they love each other, they get pregnant, but they don't really feel like they can take care of the child. But instead of committing the terrible act of abortion, they decide to have the child and put the child up for adoption to a better off or more well off family where the child can have a better life. And that's what's going on in Exodus 21:7. A man sells his daughter as a maidservant to a more well off family in Israel in hopes that she'll be able to rise to a level of nobility. And a lot of times, what the Amma would become would be, excuse me, I'm going to cough real quick. I've been battling a sore throat and a cold for about 3 weeks. So this Amal would become the wife of maybe one of the master's sons. It says there in the text that if she's displeasing to her master who chose her for himself, then he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he's acted treacherously with her. Okay. It says, or if he chooses her for his son, he must deal with her according to the customary treatment of daughters. And then verse 10, if he takes an additional wife, he must not, here's the key, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights. There's the covenant obligations of the first wife. And if he does not do these three things for her, she may leave free of charge without any exchange of money. Now, this is an amma, or a maidservant, that rises to the level eventually in that master's home of possibly being one of the master's wives there. Okay. The key here is that if food, clothing, and conjugal rights or marital rights are required covenant obligations for the master to this amma, how much more to a lady that's not an amma that he chooses for his wife and covenants with his wife. So all through the Torah, there is an understanding that marriage has obligations to it. When a man and a woman get married, it's not just like they get married and don't do anything. The man has obligations and the woman has obligations. It's no different. It's not identical, but it's very similar to an employer and an employee. There is obligations, and when those obligations are shunned, like unrepentantly shunned, then that covenant or that contract is broken. It is nullified, and there's an opportunity for it to end. It doesn't have to end. There can be amends be made. There can be repentance. Praise Yahweh. Sometimes things are restored. But all through the Torah, marriage is seen as a covenant or a contract between two parties. So specifically with the man being the provider and the protector of the wife. So hopefully that helps the question there.
Okay, thank you. And I think we just had a couple more, and we'll stop taking questions here. Let me see. Joseph A. Snade is asking, how long does a woman need to be abandoned by her unbelieving husband before she would no longer be bound, as in 1 Corinthians 7:15 in the KJV?
Yeah. So 1 Corinthians 7 it has a context all of its own. I won't spend a whole lot of time, but if you start at the very beginning there in verse 1, concerning the things that you wrote unto me. So Paul is answering a letter that the Corinthians had wrote to him. We don't have that letter, but Paul is giving answers to them. And I remember when I was growing up in the youth group, my youth pastor would say, he'd quote it from the KJV, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. And he'd say, young men, don't be touching the girls. It's good for a man not to touch a woman. And I think that's a good practice, right? It's a good principle. But I think contextually there, what Paul means in the Greek is because of the present distress, the current circumstance, there's a lot of persecution going on. It's good for a man to remain single. It's good for a man not to marry. That's what it means not to touch a woman. But he says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, every woman her own husband. And so what takes place as you continue to read in 1 Corinthians 7 is that there were some people who were married and they were receiving Paul's letter, and they misunderstood Paul about celibacy and singleness, and they decided, you know what? Paul said it's good if I'm single, so I'm going to leave my spouse and live this single life. And Paul's saying, no, 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 no. I didn't come in here to break up marriages. If you're married, you can stay married. I'm just saying that it's good for the single people. Excuse me. It's good for the single people to recognize that it's probably best for them to stay single due to the present distress. So, in regards to verse 15, particularly, when a person, woman or a man, is abandoned by their unbelieving spouse, um, I don't know that there's a set period of time, particularly. Uh, I do think that it would probably be wise for the believer to spend some time in prayer and in fasting and in hopes that they could regain their spouse that has decided to leave. But I don't think they're under bondage to remain that way forever. But the key here is that First Corinthians 7 has its own unique context in and of itself.
Okay. So thank you for your answer, brother. We have a super chat came in from Ruth Elizabeth, and she's asking, "Can I divorce my husband if he's wanting a second wife against my consent?"
Hmm. Oh boy. So, oh man, I don't know if this is overstepping the bounds of the conversation, and um, I don't believe that the Torah of Yahweh condemns a man having more than one wife. Um, but I do think most men I've met over the years in the Torah community that feel like they have to talk about it all the time, I don't really think that those men are worthy of having a second wife like an Abraham or a Jacob Israel. And I don't think that Yahweh would ever desire for a man to break up his first marriage that he has in order to obtain um, a second marriage or a second wife. So I think it's one thing if you're in Hebrew culture and a man and a woman get married, like even though Jacob got tricked into taking Leah, he fulfilled her week, and then he got Rachel, and then he had to work another 7 years there for Rachel, and then he also had Bilhah and Zilpah as their handmaids that eventually were given to him to have children by uh, through the handmaids for Rachel and Leah. All that was understood initially in that culture. So I don't think it's wise that if a man and a woman get married and the woman, thinks, hey, it's me and it's him. I don't think it's wise, and I don't think Yahweh would approve of a man all of a sudden 10 years later saying, "Hey, you know what? I want a second wife." I don't think that would be righteous. If there was an initial understanding, then I don't think that there's anything wrong with it personally, based upon the Torah. Um, but you know, we're venturing into Brother Sean said some counseling here, and I would just say a lot of these men in the Torah community that say that they want and talk about a second wife, I think they probably need to work on the marriage that they're in. And I just don't think men, for the majority of the time that talk about this subject, I don't really think they have their first marriage ironed out, and I think they may be wanting a second one for the wrong reasons. So,
Okay. Thank you so much for the answer. And that'll be the last question we take tonight. I think Matthew's voice is given out. I think he's had a long day.
yeah, a long 3 weeks. Oh,
Yeah.
it's been bothering me so much. I didn't want to call in sick. I wanted to go ahead and do the show, and I am feeling better than I was feeling 3 or 4 days ago. But just yeah, please pray for me. I have to preach 2 services here pretty soon. So but yeah, I've enjoyed this, Brother Sean. There was a lot of questions that I thought would come up that didn't come up that I've had people ask me throughout the years, but I enjoyed the ones that got asked.
Awesome, brother. Awesome, guys. And if you're not already aware, you can check out Matthew on multiple platforms. He is, we'll put this up real quick. He is over on YouTube. He's on TikTok. He's on Facebook. Pretty sure you're on Instagram, probably, aren't you?
Yeah, Instagram I keep private for my
Okay.
family and my wife and children. But I do, by the way, on my website, ministersnewcovenant.org, you can go to the sermon section and click on divorce and remarriage. And I have I think a 6 or 7 part sermon series on the subject. And also my written notes are available if anybody would rather read those, where they go into detail, at least my understanding biblically and historically there. So yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, you guys can check out. You said you're.
Yeah, so right down there, see that on the top icon, it says sermons.
Oh, there we
You
go.
click that one,
Oh,
and
wow.
all the sermons are, they're categorized on the right by topic and then on the left by book. But on the right topic, there should be one that says divorce and remarriage. They're alphabetical order.
Yep.
Yeah, there it is. So if you click that, and then it should take you to another page, and it'll take you to my notes and also the audio sermons of that particular series. So
Nice. So you
yeah.
have. Oh, is it not showing? Hang on a second.
I don't know why it's not popping
It's
up.
not. Yeah, it didn't show. That's weird. Because I clicked on it, but it. I think it's going to show here. There we go. So there we go.
Oh, there
That
we go. Okay, yeah.
And you can see, you can actually listen to his sermons on this topic as well as find notes on it and everything. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty. It looks like you put a lot of effort into the website. Looks good.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, I've been doing this for a good little while. Doesn't make me right, but I have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into a lot of subjects, this one included. So, yeah, didn't know anything about it. I had an old man ask me about it when I was 16 or 17 years old, and had not a clue, and so been studying it ever since. So,
It's a extremely hot topic. We get questions about it all the time. We have to pray about which ones we're going to address because we don't want to fall into counseling. I'm not a qualified counselor
sure,
for
sure.
couples, and we don't. I'm not even a pastor like you are in your situation where you have an actual,
Mm,
congregation with regular people that you get to know on a personal basis. So I don't pretend to give counsel to situations I have no clue about the details and don't know these
sure.
people personally. And so I do know though that there's a great need out there for pastors to be able to address this question. So I really appreciate you being willing to sit in the hot seat and take these
Yeah.
questions about this topic.
Thank you, brother Sean. You're always kind. Thank you, brother. Appreciate the opportunity.
That's right. And some people are just saying, "Mo wives, mo problems." So
More husbands, more problem.
that's right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
work on your marriages, man. Everything. If I could say something here at the end, I'm a big advocate for a loving marriage. Yahweh blessed me with a beautiful wife. Everything, men, everything, women, stems out of that marriage. If you can get that right, Yahweh will bless you in so many more avenues of life.
It's true. I believe it, man. Many years ago, when I was a financial planner, the guy that was kind of mentoring me into that business, I was getting married at the time. During that, as I was finishing my licensing and everything, and actually getting out, and I was getting married at the same time. And he told me, he said, he at the time he was only like 34, 35, but I was about 24 at the time, and he said, well, get ready for God to bless you because now that you have a wife, he's gonna double your income. And I was like, "Well, how's that work? Is that in the Bible somewhere?" He's like, "No, no." He knows you'll need it.
Yeah, I've been blessed. I think I followed you and Sister Lindsay since you first got together, and then now you got your little is it Levi?
Levi, yeah,
Yeah,
Levi
little
Joshua.
Levi there, and I get to watch him, and it's hard not to press that heart button on Facebook when I see Levi
Yeah,
because he's just precious, and I've seen you two, not just grow theologically, but just grow together, and I think you're setting a good example for the younger generation of husband and a wife, and so may Yahweh continue to bless you in your marriage and little
thank you.
Levi. And man, Levi doesn't know he's packed with a mom and dad with all this biblical knowledge. He just doesn't even know it yet. So
Yeah, he's a blessing, and she's a blessing as well, and we're doing our best to, walk in love and tenderness with each other, and
yeah,
just let God grow us more together as much as possible. But we
amen.
hope we never have to. We know hope we never face rough times. But my grandmother gave me some incredible marriage advice when I was younger, when my parents were divorcing. My
Mm.
grandmother, who's passed on now, she said to me, she said, sometimes in marriage, you give a little and sometimes you take a little, and the rest of the time you just shut up. That was grandma's advice.
So true. Amen.
Yeah.
So true.
Well, thank you again, Matthew, for being on. Thank you for being on the hot seat tonight. Thank you, Juan. Appreciate the super chat, man. Thank you so much for that. No question. We just got some people showing love. Appreciate that. And guys, go check out Minister of the New Covenant, YouTube, TikTok, and also the website. What was the website name again?
ministersnewcovenant.org.
There it
Yeah.
is. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time here on the hot seat.